This is a huge journey that you went on. You set off from your own front door in Glasgow to walk all the way to Rome. A journey that eventually took 2,000 miles, crossing 6 countries across 6 months, where you face all kinds of weather, hills, different terrain.
I had 2 rules. One was I am not carrying a rucksack, and the other was I am not going over the Alps. I'm part of a sort of community of adventure. It's people who don't laugh when you come up with an adventure idea. It's people who say, great idea. I know somebody who could help.
What I really love about your journey is that it's not just a story of you walking to Rome. This, at its very heart, is about the kindness of humanity.
Everybody I met was kind. I seemed to be on a free food tour of Britain, my friends called it, because the pubs and the cafes that I ate in invariably would say, this is on the house, you're walking to Rome. People were saying, just take a train, just take a bus, never mind the Alps, just leave out the Alps. Nobody's going to worry if you don't go over the Alps. But my stubbornness didn't let me. I wanted to walk every mile and I had to go over the Alps. I think the only person that thought I could do this was me. And breaking it down into little bits and just putting one foot in front of the other, we are more capable than we give ourselves credit for.
So I guess we should start with the here and now.
Okay.
Because we're in a very special place that was actually part of your journey.
Yes.
Our Lady of Compassion in Saffron Walden.
Yep.
We're in the church hall next to the church. Mm-hmm. And this was a special place for you.
I landed here during my journey. I got into the habit of asking, when I was in a village, asking pub bar staff, is there somewhere I could camp? And sometimes I would end up in various places, including customers' back gardens or spare rooms, but also church grounds. So I then started to think ahead, and if I could see that there was a church where I thought there was grounds, I would email or phone ahead and ask if I could stay or camp in their grounds. This church, I emailed and asked permission, and I got a response that, well, no, you can't camp here because we have no grounds, but you can have the church hall if you like. And a great upgrade. So I asked cheekily if I could have 2 nights in the church hall because it was a heat wave kicking in the following day. So I came here and I camped here in this hall, and I was invited in to tell the parishioners at the 3 masses over that weekend what I was doing and why I was here. And I came away with a fantastic donation to the 2 charities from the parishioners here. And they have kindly invited me back, and we're doing a talk later today.
It's a really lovely part of your story, which we'll get onto later. But how you've been able to kind of scratch this line through the land that you've travelled through. But because you've travelled at a nice, slow human pace, you've been able to connect with people along the way.
Yeah.
And now you're returning back to these connections that you made over a year ago, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Meeting up with people that I met then. I'm staying with one of what I call kindnappers, who invited me that day that I was here. He said, I have so many questions, I need to take you for a drink. So we did. We went for a drink, and while we were out having a drink, he then phoned his wife and said, put an extra plate on the table and put a towel out because Geraldine is coming home for a meal and a shower. And then they dropped me back here for my camping. So yes, and that kindnapping happened right throughout my journey, all the way to Rome.
What I really love about your journey is that it's not just a story of you walking to Rome. Mm-hmm. This, at its very heart, is about the kindness of humanity.
Absolutely. And say, I don't know whether I didn't ever expect it, but when it was happening, I wasn't shocked because people are good. But what was interesting was I automatically was telling these stories on Facebook and Instagram, just as keeping people in touch. And the response overwhelmingly that was coming back was, wow, you're reinforcing my sort of faith in human nature. People seem to be so good. And I realised I had a responsibility then to keep telling these stories, to reinforce that, because I think it's easy for everyone to assume that something scary is out there or people are bad, and actually everybody I met was kind. And that's the story of the trip, really.
Yeah, people really did do everything to make your passage through their land as lovely and as comfortable as possible. They took you into their homes. They recommended routes for you. They bought food for you.
Yes.
At one point, you mentioned that 2 people bought you the same breakfast, or tried to, at least anyway.
Yes.
It's just shows that there's people so much kindness that it was almost completely saturated in your day, because you just only had a limit of what you could take.
Thankfully, I didn't have to carry it. I did actually meet one fireman on the route who spoke about that overwhelming kindness that he had received on a walk, that he deliberately walked without any food and without any water. He was doing it for a mental health charity. And the point of his trip, this was in the UK, was to prove that people could be kind. But he actually found that he had to refuse the food because he couldn't carry it all. Whereas I seem to be on a free food tour of Britain, my friends called it, because the pubs and the cafes that I ate in invariably would say, "This is on the house, you're walking to Rome." Or, as you say, people would say, I'd be chatting to somebody and they had either quietly, secretly, or, told me that they had paid for my meal or my breakfast. That one cafe, I remember that, where 2 of them, somebody came up and said, "I want to pay for this." I'm really sorry, but someone has already paid for it. So we're fighting over it.
That's wonderful. So let's talk about, this is a huge journey that you went on. You set off from your own front door in Glasgow to walk all the way to Rome, a journey that eventually took 2,000 miles, crossing 6 countries across 6 months, where you face all kinds of weather, hills, different terrain, even encountering exploding lampposts.
Yeah.
I want to work out why you wanted to walk such a long distance.
I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. The story of how I ended up on this trip is that I was at home one day, 2016, and a thought came across my head that I had never been to Rome. And the next thought was, one day I'll walk there. And that honestly was it. That 2016 was also the year that Mum had been diagnosed with vascular dementia. So I hoped and I knew that I wouldn't be going away for a long time, for a long walk while Mum was with me. I had no idea when it was. And actually, I think it was probably 2 years before I verbalised this crazy, ridiculous idea to anyone. So it was just a thought that came to me. One day I'll walk there and it wouldn't go away. And
Rome, I guess, it must have a very special place in your life because of your faith.
Yes, well, it does. And I guess Mum and Dad had been to Rome, and I guess I always wanted to go, but it just had never come, I could have probably gone at any time if I wanted to. But this just seemed to be a different way to do it. And there is a Camino route from Canterbury to Rome, but that idea wasn't right for me. I almost immediately thought, no, I'll walk from home. That's it was a way to get there, a way to be there, and and I guess a connection with Mum and Dad because they had been.
And you are a Roman Catholic?
I am.
So growing up, did you grow up in Glasgow?
I did, yeah.
So what did religion mean to you, and what has it meant to you your whole life?
Yeah, it is a part of my life, and it's a big part of my life. I grew up, in Glasgow, and although I've moved away and come back to Glasgow, I've stayed in the same parish that I grew up in. So I know a lot of people for a lifetime, really. But yeah, it is part of my life. It's probably a quiet part. There's a lot of people that maybe don't know. So I'm not, and I guess people would then say, well, they could tell by my nature rather than by, my sort of verbalizing and more in my actions than my words. But yeah, it is and it has been an important part.
Did it feel like it was a pilgrimage you wanted to make at all?
It never set out as a pilgrimage. Often people mentioned that when I was on the walk or before the walk, but for me it was a challenge to myself to do it. It was a ridiculous 2,000 miles. I had walked 300-mile walks before, but I'd never done anything like this. And apart from one trip in the Outer Hebrides, all my walks and camping trips, I always had company. So this was different again, doing it on my own. I guess it was a pilgrimage because I was going to Rome and I knew I would finish in Vatican Square. That was my target. But I think a pilgrimage felt different. I think it was, could I do this as a challenge to myself and an adventure? There wasn't a lot of planning and maybe there wasn't a lot of thinking beforehand as well.
Yeah. I only mentioned pilgrimage because I know what happens at the end.
Yeah.
Which I guess we'll leave and let the people who are listening to find that out.
Yeah.
But something very special happened at the end.
Absolutely. And I didn't know about that until the day before.
Right. We'll come to that later. Okay, so you talked about some of the walks that you've been on. Mm-hmm. What was adventure as part of your life before this trip?
Only relatively recently, guess in the last 10 years, really, maybe slightly longer, but my first big challenge, and it was a massive challenge for me, was cycling from London to Paris. And that was properly scary for me. And as much as I got the 20-week training plan, and if it said on a Tuesday I had to cycle for 22 miles on the training plan, I cycled 22 miles on a Tuesday. That was because I was just so convinced that if I did not follow this plan to a T, I would never get to Paris. And so it's a pushing myself and proving that I can do it, and proving it to me. Don't need to prove it for anybody else, but yeah. And then other than that, it's been a community. I'm part of a sort of community of adventure sort of people, if you like, or people who like to go on adventures. And that community, I've only just been recently talking about it, as much as it's people who don't laugh when you come up with an adventure idea. They don't say, oh, you can't do that. That's not possible. It's people who say, great idea. I know somebody who could help, or how can I help, or here's some ideas. And so I guess being part of that community just, has sort of forged and pushed me after the cycle to Paris. What else can I do?
Is this the Yes Tribe?
It's the Yes Tribe
you're talking about.
Should I go back and mention that?
Well, no, I think we've had Dave Cornthwaite on the podcast. He talked about kind of the formation of the Yes Tribe, getting a community of Yes people, and how he built that up over years. You've been part of it. Yeah. I've been part of it.
Yeah.
It's how we initially met, probably about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it is so inspiring because you also get surrounded by people who are doing these things. Yes. And you can see the potential, what people do, and that inspires you to maybe do your own twist on something.
Yes, absolutely.
So it must have been like a really inspiring incubation period being a part of this
Yes Tribe. And I have been on various adventures with other members of the Yes Tribe as a result of that community. You know, I had never paddleboarded before. I had 1 hour lesson 2 weeks before. I paddled with five of us down the Caledonian Canal from Inverness to Fort William. And I've fallen in once, but not on that trip. I've walked from Cardiff to London with Erin from Chicago, who's in the Yes Tribe, but in the USA. And we also, Erin and I, walked between all the 7 cities in Scotland. So both those trips were similar to this, really, but a smaller version, 300 miles, wild camping, and being kindnapped along the way. So that's the kind of things that I have done. And I think that's the good thing about the Yes Tribe is, yes, people will look up and there are people who do what I would consider mad, big, huge adventures. But every adventure, no matter how big or small, is valid for anybody. And it doesn't need to be physical adventures. It could be changes of lifestyle or changes of jobs or just small changes that might feel small to other people. But for you to take that step, it's just moving it forward and being helped along the way.
No, it's interesting what you say about that, about the diversity in what adventure means as well. It's something that I want to really champion on this podcast is recognizing that it's not just people who cross countries, on foot or by bike that defines an adventure. It could be an adventure in a place, like for instance, Dave and Emma's Big Sky Hideaway. What an incredible story that is, how they were able to take a patch of land that wasn't being used for camping and turned it into an eco campsite and have brought people together. Whether it's someone who's created a market garden out of just a piece of land that was just grass and now is feeding a whole community in Cambridgeshire, things like that. I think it's also about recognising the people who don't take normal as normal.
Yes.
Who perhaps want to go against the grain, or not kind of just follow what everyone else is doing in life and actually work out there could be other paths you could take, and recognising that by taking a different path which other people don't take, you learn more because you have to be independent, you have to think on your feet, you have to react to certain scenarios which might not be as comfortable as following the trend.
I literally just this weekend, I was with Dave and Em and some of the others from the Yes Tribe at the Big Sky Hideaway. And that was what we were talking about, saying, big or small, that's, you get ideas or you forge more of that ridiculous thought that came across my head about walking to Rome. And I don't necessarily think that it came from the Yes Tribe, but with the Yes Tribe, then I knew that this was an idea that I could follow through and get lots of help and advice from people along the way within the Yes Tribe.
So, I guess before we move off the Yes Tribe, we should note that there are communities in different parts of the UK. So they have like local groups. So anyone who is listening who wants to get involved in the Yes Tribe or connect with like-minded people, there might necessarily be something that's close to them where there are local meetups every month.
Yeah, that's actually what this weekend was about. And I'm sort of taking on the Yes Tribe Scotland. So I will be generating ideas and adventures and meetups around Scotland. So yeah.
Great. You mentioned the walks that you did beforehand with other people or on your own. Were you carrying a rucksack?
All previous walks, yes, I was carrying a rucksack and I hated every minute. And honestly, at the end of my walk with Erin to London, from Cardiff to London, I wasn't on my knees physically, but I felt like I was on my knees physically. And I put that down to the rucksack. I know I had learned over the years about travelling light. But with a tent and a sleeping bag and food, and that, there's a limit to how light you could go with it. But yeah, the rucksack was a big nemesis for me on any of those previous trips.
I've never done a multi-day journey on foot, so I've never actually had to carry overnight. But I've done many other multi-day journeys by bike. Alistair Humphreys said in one of his books that that a walking tour is the hardest of all the ways that you can travel.
Okay.
Because you have to carry everything on your back.
Yes.
With the bike tour, you got the bike to do that. If you're going by horseback, you got the horse to do that. Mm-hmm. But walking, there's no escaping the fact that you have to carry that.
I escaped it.
Oh, well, let's talk about that then. So what was well, first of all, did you not want to go by rucksack? Was that just definitely like a...
So when I talked about the thoughts that this idea had come to me, and then it was probably a couple of years before I verbalised that, by the time I spoke about it, I had 2 rules, and only 2 rules. One was, I am not carrying a rucksack. And the other was, I am not going over the Alps. I didn't have the answer to those 2 rules, but that was the only way that I was prepared to set out. And I had to solve both of those issues.
So the rucksack issue, you were able to solve.
Yes.
By adopting, a buggy?
Yeah.
Would you kind of describe it as?
That's exactly what it is. It's a 3-wheel buggy for running parents who want to continue running but with a child in the buggy. But it's also adapted so that you can have a bar and strap it around your waist for running parents again, but I wasn't running. There's also an adaptation that you could apparently ski with it, and you could put it on the back of your bike. So there's a multi-use buggy.
Yeah, the Jedmobile.
Yeah.
Which, as you described, you could either be pushing it or pulling it.
Yes.
And by pulling it, you have a strap around your waist,
yes.
and it comes out almost perpendicular. The pole itself is like a good old meter long before it then dips down towards the ground and then meets the buggy. I watched you walk with it this morning. You brought it today, and I even tried it myself. It's an incredible contraption that does take all the weight off your body. But I did notice it was like a little bit of a pull. And even wearing it for just 2 minutes, as soon as I took it off, my body was like missing it. It was almost like, oh, where's that gone? It just connected to it so quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting when I see people giving it a go. They all talk about the bounce. I probably did notice the bounce at the start, but I don't think, and I'm not aware of the bounce now. And it's fantastic on the flat, and it's lovely going downhill gently. Steep downhills, it tries to overtake, but the slightest incline up, I'm back to having a weight. But it's still not as bad as a rucksack. So at the end of my 300-mile walk to London, I said felt like I was on my knees. At the end of 2,000 miles to Rome, I could have walked it again.
Would you have turned around?
That would have been stupid. But I wasn't broken.
Yeah. I will come to this again, but actually I think you had a really good balance with how you split up your journey. But before we come to that, there was more purpose to your journey of just going to Rome. You were also raising money for charities along the way. You were raising money for Mary's Meals, a Scottish charity that works in Malawi to provide meals at school for children, and for Dementia UK. Tell me why, what those charities mean to you.
Well, as I said in the introduction, in 2016, Mum was diagnosed with vascular dementia, and they were a great source of help to me just by phone for advice and help when Mum was going into the care home in 2019. So that's quite obviously why I've been raising funds for Dementia UK. Mary's Meals did start in Malawi. They're now feeding 2.4 million children all around the world. And although Dad had passed away 2 years before Mary's Meals was created, he was a Glasgow black hat taxi driver. And when I was growing up, he would come in with a bag of change. It was change from the day. And I would fish out the halfpences. And I would save up the halfpences and send them to the children in Africa. So when I was thinking who will I do this in memory of Dad, then I thought that's kind of charity that felt like same idea, starting in Africa, feeding the children, and he would approve. So that's why I chose Mary's Meals.
That's wonderful, the fact that you had two different charities that could remember each of your parents along the way as well.
Yeah. A lot.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. So, May 2023, you set off on the 6th of May from your front door.
Yes.
In the Scottish rain.
Yes.
What was that first day like?
Weird. I remember being aware that I was weirdly calm when I stepped out the door. I had a few friends there to sort of cheer me on. I had my niece and my friend were walking with me for that first day. And it was a bit surreal because I honestly did very little planning and literally sort of Google Map each day, where will I go? Half an hour before I left, I was cleaning the oven. So I don't know what that was about, because I don't remember the previous time that I cleaned the oven.
You're going away for a long time. You
Yeah,
made sure that the house was clean.
I had the house sitters coming. For some reason, that was an important thing to do, which is a ridiculous thing to do. Probably just procrastinating what I was actually setting out to do. So it was calming, and it was fun because I had Kerry and Lucy with me walking. It was in the rain, and it happened to be the day of the coronation. So we were sort of looking out. We actually only came across one sort of party for the coronation, but that was another sort of angle to the sort of what we were going to do today. And I was pushing the buggy that day because honestly, I didn't have all of my gear in that first day because I knew that my friend was coming to give me a lift to get me home. So it was really just it's almost like a trial.
Well, how was the trial? What did you learn from that first day when you did have the ability to be close to home?
I learned that the buggy pushes very straight. There's no, every turn I had to sort of lift it onto its back wheels to turn. So there was no sort of flex in the front wheel. I learned the width, which was interesting, going through bollards and footpaths and things like that. And I learned, I think, that I quite liked it. I had only been out on a couple of walks with it before, but it seemed to be this is going to work. As I say, it didn't have full weight at that time, so of course it would probably work better. But the front wheel steerage probably was the biggest issue. And also the other thing, I was still in Glasgow in effect, but it wasn't long before we were starting to think, well, where do we stop for a cup of tea? Where do we stop for lunch? So that routine had kicked in almost instantly. That certainly became a focus for me each day. Where was I going to eat? Where was I going to stop?
Yeah, this is a crucial part of any long distance journey because actually you can't really fully plan your entire route going forwards. Yeah. You have to kind of only plan the next day or two in advance. Yeah. But you're also going into the unknowns of these places that you've never been to before. You don't know what's around the corner or
Absolutely.
Where the next food stop will be. Great that you had the buggy that you could have some snacks and some water in there. But for when it came to anything of substance, I guess you were just having to react with what you found along the way and hoping that you'd find a good pub at the end of the day.
Well, that is one of the things that I sort of think about since or during it was every journey has got an A to B, and my A to B was to Rome, but that Rome quickly went out my head. My A to B was today. Where am I going today? How far am I walking? What am I eating? Drinking and maybe go to the toilet. It literally came down to today, because more than that, and I worry about tomorrow when I get to it, if I get to it.
You were planning every day as it came on Google Maps.
Yes.
How was that as a route planning tool?
It was a good route mapping tool. If I could have asked Google Maps the question, shortest, flattest route to Rome, please, and it gave me that was an effect because because I had the trailer, I had to stick to roads. I couldn't risk unless I knew, and I'd had some information that told me that a whole footpath was a good footpath for the length. And I fell foul of that a couple of times as well. I had to stick to roads, but obviously I wanted quieter roads. So I generally asked Google, how do I get to wherever by walking? And it perhaps sometimes gave me 2 or 3 options. And then I was figuring out, that might be like slightly further, but it's flatter, or that's shorter, but there's other obstacles. So I was making that sort of Google mapping decision as I was going along each day, and sometimes changing it because I would go and then realise that there was a footpath and it told you it was 3 miles long and you could see that it was a reasonable footpath, then I would divert and change. But Google Maps, for me, it worked. It may not be the most technically, I'm sure there are various other options, But that was the one that I was familiar with, and that's the one that I settled into using.
And the compromise for you, I guess, was that you had to stay off as many kind of footpaths that would be overgrown.
Yes.
Which is why you, I guess, chose to be on more roads.
Yes.
But how did you find quieter roads and not let Google Maps take you onto busy roads?
Well, in the UK, that was easy because I generally would sort of figure out, is it a dual carriageway, is it a fast road, or sort of country. I was walking through the countryside a lot, so I guess a lot of the roads, in theory, the quieter roads, but not necessarily slower roads. They were still quite fast. But with my trailer behind me, I decided that I was a bike with a trailer, so I was walking on the same side of the road as the traffic, rather than what you would normally do is walk against the traffic. And it just meant I thought, well, you have to look out for me. I'm not looking out for you. And I just held my ground that way. But yeah, in the UK it was familiar because obviously reading Google Maps and knowing the UK, I could figure out that was a fast, busy road. And I sometimes then had to add a mile or two in order to stay on safer routes.
So in your trailer, you had some camping gear, as well as I guess your clothes. You were planning to camp when you could, but also have the flexibility to not camp when you needed to, for I guess your own comfort and safety.
Absolutely.
So talk us through kind of how you balance that as you went along each day.
I set out thinking that, well, I'll walk 6 days out of 7. I'll have a day off each week. I don't even think I was into week 2 before I realised that I'm having a really tough day today. I'm having a day off tomorrow. And that then became my routine. But generally, with the camping, I thought I would wild camp and come back to the wild camping. But yeah, I had my camping gear and I was going to find somewhere at roughly 12, 14 miles each day. And that's where Google Maps and my route was dictated roughly by routes and where is there somewhere at the end, is there a village or a campsite? But invariably I got into the routine of popping into the village pub when I got to what I thought would be the end of today. Sometimes that was lunchtime, and ask, is there somewhere around here I could camp? And that had me then camping in pub gardens. It had me camping in church grounds. But also customers would say, well, actually, come and camp in my garden. And I did that. Or some customers said, well, never mind the garden. Come in, we've got a spare room. And even if I was camping in the garden, they would, feed me and get me breakfast the next morning and send me off, usually with a bit of a packed lunch tucked into Roman, and off I would go. So I never knew today where I was sleeping tonight and what mode of sleeping, sort of where I would be sleeping, but I just knew that I'd be fine.
Yeah, it's good, I suppose, to have different options. The camping was there for when you needed somewhere where you didn't have anywhere.
Yep.
And you were comfortable doing that. But your credit card is also a really useful tool for when you just get really wet or you're feeling really tired and feeling really low. Yes. And it's knowing that you don't have to. This journey doesn't have to be to your own detriment.
Absolutely.
In the long term, and it's finding a good balance. It's like, yes, I want to try and enjoy being out in nature, but sometimes that's going to be hard to do because I'm not going to want that. I did treat myself now and again to B&Bs and hotels. That's there's that's no confession on that, because I think that's a reasonable thing to do. I'm aware of the privilege of being able to do that, but certainly that was my option as well. But I did enjoy the camping too, especially in the better weather. But yeah, I always knew that I had the bail-out option, and I took it. Yeah. And then you also mentioned you had the kindnappers who took you in. Yes. People having you in your gardens, in their houses, feeding you. And I guess what also happened is that it became a snowball effect, is that people who took you in would ask you where your next destination is. And because that's actually not that far away, they would be like, oh, we know someone there. And there's obviously occasions when they would be helping you find connections in places before you even got there. Yes. Yeah, that did happen as well. I was being passed along by kindnappers
people waiting for me, literally along the way. And there was also people that I met, they were saying, "Oh, you must be Geraldine." Hang on. And it's because they had been told there's a woman walking with a trailer and look out for her, she's coming your way. And even that wasn't necessarily kidnappers. They were kidnappers in a way that, to me, they are, because they would sort of wish me good luck, ask me what I was doing, and invariably give a donation to charities as well, even just people that I met on the street. But I often think that it's as much about giving people the opportunity to help, because they want to help, as it is receiving the help. That they would, be, often people were thanking me. There was one family that I stayed with where the husband had dementia, and obviously over dinner then there was a lot of chat, and I was talking about mum and how her sort of dementia had developed and her little peculiarities. And the next day the daughter, a grown daughter, came walking with me for a mile or two, and she said it's been so good for my mum to hear you talking. It's given her some sort of confidence and validation of what she's going through as a wife with her husband with dementia. And I think probably it prompted her to realise that she was now in a position where she needed to ask for help. So they were thanking me for them taking me in for the night, which seemed the wrong way around, but everybody wins.
That's an incredible part of the story, actually, knowing that people needed you to come into their lives.
Yeah.
This person who was just walking through past their front yard.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Oh, I felt great, feeling like I've kept in touch with them. But I felt like I had something to offer, not consciously, but it's just a natural thing to talk about. And I could recognise some of the things that he was doing that mum would do, and I was able to give examples of how I had sort of dealt with it. So it felt good.
Your buggy, your jetmobile, your Roman that you were pulling along turns heads. It attracts attention. So what was generally the kind of reaction that people were giving you when they just saw you walking by with this?
Well, what on earth? And there was a lot of people thought there was a child, and I confessed that it had to be an ugly child because it was covered over with a cover, or a dog. Some people thought it was a dog. And they could see I had my logo on the front, so you could see if you were close to me, then people say, "Home to Rome, what are you doing?" I'm walking to Rome. And certainly in the UK, that was just, crazy. You can't, and there were people that said you can't do that. And there was also people who said, "How are you going to do it? How can you do that?" And I'm thinking, well, put one foot in front of the other. That was just me being a little bit sarcastic in my own head. I never said that to anybody out loud. But yes, it was generally a shock for people because it is unusual. Nobody got irritated by it. It was if I was obstructing the road and I just stopped and waited till they passed, but yeah, it did draw attention. And I realised it was handy. Whenever I was going to a cafe or somewhere, I would deliberately have it sitting so that people could see the logo, and that would, sort of draw a little bit of attention and get the conversation going, because my purpose was to share the awareness and raise funds for the charities. So I got quite good at subtly letting people know what was happening, and it was successful.
That's such a great opener as well.
Yeah.
And doing a journey on your own, it's nice to have some time on your own for the reflection, but when you're doing it day by day, you do really need some kind of warmth from someone else, and some smiles, some conversation. Absolutely. And I suppose arriving in a village or town, a cafe or a pub was a really crucial part of your day for your own mental health, to kind of actually have some connection with a human as well.
Yeah, and I think you're saying about me standing out, if I was walking through a town or village, even if I wasn't intended to stop there, by drawing the attention, I invariably would say hello to everybody that I passed. And I would get a hello and a chat with everybody that I passed. But absolutely going to cafes and pubs and places at the end or even in the middle of the day, it was always a good opportunity to be around people and chat with people, and for me to learn from them as well as the other way around.
And to those who questioned you or were shocked and surprised by the audacity of someone to say that they could walk to Rome, did you see something in them change as you were having conversation with them when they suddenly realized that, how you were doing it and that you could do it?
Sometimes it wasn't a long conversation, so not everybody. And it goes back to what I said before about people not laughing at your adventure idea. So if this isn't a normal thing to do for most people, and not a normal thing for anybody really, but so when I was meeting people who wouldn't even necessarily think to walk to the shops, then it was just too far for them to think how. And I there were a few where I could see in their face, she's got no chance. She's mad and she'll fail and they felt better for thinking that perhaps, but that didn't offend me because I was in this mode of I just need to get to the end of today. It wasn't that, yes, I was saying I was walking to Rome. I had no idea how far Rome was really, but I just thought if I just add another little bit and another little bit, then I might get there.
It's an interesting way of how to break down any long journey. Is that if you can walk 12 miles, which a lot of people can, and you can do that the day after, then just an extrapolation of that is if you just keep on doing that, eventually you get to a destination that is far beyond what you could comprehend.
Absolutely.
If you thought about it for too long.
I think if I thought about it properly, I probably wouldn't have set out from the front door. It would just do what you can. And as you say, add another bit tomorrow and see. And some days it wasn't anywhere near 12 miles that I did. And other days I had to do 20 miles. So it was just to deal with today and come back to tomorrow when I get to it.
Let's talk about the pace that you travel. Walking is such a human way to travel because you cannot really kind of speed past anything too quickly. You are absorbing things in a very real time, and you're able to stop and react to things that you find along the way. How important was it to not do too much in a day so that you could have the pleasure of enjoying where you were and connecting with the people there? Because some people think that they want to kind of push how much they walk, how much daylight they have, stop, sleep, get up the next day.
Yeah.
That can sometimes be at someone's detriment when on a journey such as long as you have been on. And I guess there's always having a balance between doing enough to kind of to move the dial, then saying, actually, the whole point of this journey is not just to pass through these places, it's to connect with them as well.
And it is a slow way to travel. And then there's the Jed slow way to travel, which is even slower. I've got particularly short legs. And but so there are actually quite a few places I want to go back and see because of that thinking I have to get up and go. And it would take me so long to get there that all I wanted to do was, bed down for the night and sleep. And then get up and go the next day. Weather was a dictator for that as well. But that's back to my thing about I'm having a tough day today. I'm having a day off tomorrow, and that gave me an opportunity. There were some places that I had already earmarked as I want to spend time there. I want to see these places. So that would be a factor on how far I went. But there was also times where even before I got to just around the Scottish border, I remember one day where I just thought there's nothing in between. I just need to push right on. And it was a horrible day because it wasn't just an 18, 20 mile day as it turned out. It was a hilly 18 to 20 mile day. I could have stopped, but I wasn't in the wild camping in the middle of the Kielder Forest mode in my head. I wasn't brave enough for that. So that my only option was to push on. And that then was putting a panic into me about the Alps because I couldn't do these rolling hills. Or I could do the rolling hills. It took me 4 hours, I think, to do 5 miles. on that day. And that's a kind of thing. And I think that's probably where I changed mode of, I don't need to go so far so fast. I just need to be comfortable. And I had no definite time factor, so that's a privilege of being able to just slow down and not push so far. I don't think sometimes in Europe I had to do that, but I never deliberately did it. Certainly in the UK again, I would cut my cloth accordingly.
What did you learn about the United Kingdom by passing through it?
It's lovely. I took what I thought would be the flattest route. That's never going to happen in Scotland anyway, but certainly coming down through England, I was, overall, it was generally quite flat. But it was interesting because I left in May, so I was walking sort of May, June to sort of early July in the UK. So I was walking with the seasons changing, but because I was going south, the season was sort of changing a little bit faster every day because I was going further south every day. So that was really pretty. And there's a lot more countryside than I had ever really seen before because I've been up and down the UK on the motorway hundreds and hundreds of times, but seeing the world at 3 or probably at my pace 2 miles an hour, you see it completely differently. So I did notice little things, like people had probably during lockdown, people had put little characters in fences or little characters even into holes in trees, and I could see these kind of things because I was, even on a bike, you probably wouldn't need to notice a lot of these things. So that was really nice. And the other thing that was nice for me even was just a lot of places that you've seen the names of on the motorway now became real places to me, real villages, and I can now picture Bridge as a village, that it was just a big long name on the A1 motorway. So yeah, it was lovely, the UK. And it's the same with everybody I met.
What stands out for you in maybe a place or an experience?
There's just so many. I could talk for another hour about examples of things that were incredible or unusual for what I thought. So I talked about going to villages and maybe asking in the village pub, but there was one village where I didn't even get the line to the village pub. At this point, I met a woman in the street and asked her, is there somewhere around here I could camp? And she didn't, her eyes didn't pop out her head. So she actually said, well, I told her what I was walking to Rome and whatever, and she said, well, you have to camp in the village green because we need to be able to see you to make sure that you're safe, which I thought was unusual because I probably would think that people wouldn't. The last place they would want you to camp is the village green.
This is Walkerburn you're talking about? It was
Walkerburn. It was still in Scotland, in the Scottish borders. And so I pitched my tent at the village green, and there was a couple of people walked past and I was saying, is this going to be okay? Thinking somebody is going to be annoyed at me camping in the village green. So then I did go to the pub. Once I'd pitched my tent, I did go over to the pub because back to my opportunity to spread the word and talk to people. And it was a little village, and there was a man who came in and said, who are you? You're the one who's camping. And obviously the conversation then was half a dozen people in the pub. And he then said, do you want to come in for a shower and breakfast in the morning? And I said, well, I think you should maybe go in and ask your wife first, if that's okay. So he did. He went and asked his wife. And so the next morning I camped. I chatted for the evening in the pub, and I camped in the village green. And I had my jet boil and made myself some porridge in the morning. And it was only when I went back over to their house in the morning, they said that the village WhatsApp had been going on fire, fighting over who was going to bring me breakfast in the morning, but then they spotted that I had made my own breakfast. But I did have a second breakfast in the house, but it just, the whole village, I seemed to be kidnapped by the whole village. They were all chatting about me. I was unaware of it, but they wanted to look after me, which was incredible.
Amazing. And I also read that you were parading in front of a village congregation in Bedale.
Yes. So when I was in I camped for 2 nights in Bedale. That was one of my days off. And I had a puncture in one of the tyres in Roman. And because I'd had a day off, I obviously wasn't walking with the trailer, but I went off in search of a tyre, a bike sort of repair shop or a bike shop, and I found one. But because I didn't have the tyre with me, and because it was an unusual, I didn't know the size of it, it was not a normal size bike, whatever, the chap said, well, I can't help you, I can't give you an inner tube until we bring the tyre. And he said, but we are open tomorrow, which I thought was unusual, but it was open on a Sunday. So I went round on the Sunday morning, and this was the day that I'd be walking out of Beedale. I was heading off to Ripon, and I got the tyre fixed. I played the sort of pathetic girl and got the chap to change the tyre for me. And the church was just across the road, and I could see that there was a mass on at 11 o'clock. So it was sort of 10 to whatever. I thought, well, I'm here, I'm not walking far today, I've got time. And I went over and I asked two ladies in the car park where I could, if there was somewhere that I could put Roman while I was inside. And I got a puzzled look. And then they said, well, you could hide him behind the bins, but don't block Father's parking space. So I was still sort of putting Roman behind the bins, and Father pulled into his parking space, and thankfully I wasn't blocking it. And obviously he then chatted to me, what's all this? And next thing, he's taken Roman and he's wheeling it through the back of this little village pub, church, and in through the sacristy, into a full church who's sitting waiting for 11 o'clock mass. And I'm walking in behind with my poles in my hand, and Roman was promptly put up onto the altar for mass, and I was told to go and sit down. And another parish that kindnapped me, and I was invited to tell them what I was doing and where I was going, and came away with a fabulous donation for the charities. And I'm actually going back there later this week to tell them the tales.
Amazing. And what happened in Wellow?
Wellow was what I had a bit of a hopscotch to find a pub that had grounds that people were able to. I kept getting passed from one pub to the next to get, and I ended up in Wellow because they said they had grounds and I could camp at their grounds. So that was fabulous. It was a lovely sunny Friday afternoon. So it was out, and they had a beer garden outside, and I pitched my tent at the back where people were watching me as they were having their Friday evening meal, pitching a tent in the garden, very peculiar. And I went in and I was chatting to the staff, and they loved the story and loved what I was doing. And again, I was given my meal on the house. And they said, but you should be telling everybody about this. Don't just tell us. And they told me to go around and tell everybody what I was doing. So I physically went around the pub saying, excuse me, I hope you don't mind me interrupting your date or your family meal. And I came away again with no end of help, because the next day, that was when I was sent actually by one of the customers to the cafe in the village next to where I was walking through, and she had phoned them ahead. It was friends of hers, and she told them that she was paying for my breakfast the next morning. And when I got to that cafe, they were waiting for me. They knew I was coming. And another customer came and chatted to me, and he said, I want to pay for your breakfast. And I had to apologise and say, I'm really sorry, but I think somebody's already paid for it. So I had the donations from the people in the pub in Wellow, and then one of the customers setting me up for breakfast the next morning.
It's incredible, just the impact that speaking to strangers can have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was obviously I needed help and I wanted help, but it gives them the opportunity to help in lots of different ways, because even just chatting, and some people, I remember in that well-old pub, there was a couple who had lived in Switzerland, and I was telling them still, I'm not going over the Alps, and I was asking them, do you know anybody that's got a camper van that could be my help when I get to the Alps? And I'm pretty sure if I needed to, I had their contact details, I could have got back in touch with them and they would have found me some help.
So let's talk about some of the hardships that you faced along the way. You mentioned the hills and obviously the weather. Not only were you having to deal with the British rain, so you also had the heat of the summer. You were camping along the way. how did you face the hardships of when it got tough on the hills, when it got tough in the bad weather, when you were out in the elements?
I cried. I cried. But I did have a WhatsApp group of about, I think there was 12, 14 of them all around the world on one group. And it just meant that I didn't need to think who's working just now or what time is it or whatever. And so I would just sort of put a note on, I need to speak to somebody I need help with, and somebody would call me or somebody would say, yeah, I'm here. And I'd, just sort of stop and have a chat and sort of recenter myself and get myself back. But I had to just push on. There was no alternative, at least to get somewhere safe to sleep for the night, whether that be that I had booked or planned ahead, or whether it was still I have to get to this village in order to speak to someone to find somewhere to camp or sleep. But crying, I did a bit of that. I did a fair bit of that over the time. The two big nemesis for me were the hills and the heat. The hills, because I don't do hills whether I've got a trailer or a rucksack or anything else. I get out of puff really easily, and I stop a lot. So hills went on forever. And the heat, I am sort of pale Scottish, fair-haired, blue-eyed girl, so I don't do sun. I had the most ridiculous big sun hat on, but I didn't care. I was covered. But the heat, and actually I did thank the rain whenever it came, because it was a relief to me for it to rain. I didn't want to rain too often, too long, but often it was a nice relief to have the rain.
Okay, so July 2023. You crossed the English Channel and arrived in France. Now you are no longer in the UK.
Yes.
You no longer had the familiarity of a home country. What were the big differences you noticed?
Language. I hadn't allowed myself to think of France because I knew I had to get through the UK first. So all of a sudden, I was in unknown territory, and I wasn't sure about the kindnapping, but I shouldn't have worried. I needn't have worried about the kindnapping because the good kind people are all the way through Europe. But I also was quite lucky and accidentally found what they call an avenue verte. And it was a lovely, it's an old railway line between London and Paris. And it's been changed into a cycle and walking path. Beautiful, not a pothole the whole length that I walked on it. I think I walked on that for about 6 days. So yes, it's definitely completely set up for travel and cycling and walking, so much better. And also along that Avenue Verte and in other places in France, there are bivouacs. So it's again little village greens that are deliberately set for wild camping. So I knew that I did wild camp. There wasn't necessarily a cafe nearby. There generally could be public toilets nearby, sometimes a supermarket, sometimes a cafe, but certainly somewhere to camp and set up for the night. So France, it was a nice introduction for me because it was a big fear that I had of the unknown, and it gave me an opportunity to practice my very little French. Chatted to people along the way.
And France is where you crossed the 1,000 mile mark.
Yes.
A huge milestone, because that is a phenomenal distance to have walked.
Yeah.
Only really halfway of your journey, but an incredible achievement.
Yes. I crossed the 1,000 mile mark at the far end of France in a heat wave, but 2 days previously had been a fantastic thunderstorm. So just after my 1,000 miles, I got my first 2 blisters of the trip. So it took me 1,000 miles to get a blister. And that was getting back to weather. But yeah, it was 500 miles I marked before London, and then 1,000 miles. And I'm still not, you've just mentioned halfway there. I don't think I had computed that. It was just the fact that I had crossed, I've walked 1,000 miles. That's mad. But it was 1,000 miles with lots of little miles.
Yeah, it must have given you a lot of confidence though, because it was suddenly the first time that you'd kind of clocked into 4 digits, and now that you could do 1,000 miles, and just it would seem that anything would be possible.
But still got the Alps to go over.
Right.
So,
which you wanted to avoid, but in the end you didn't.
Yes.
Explain why that was.
Back to my original 2 rules. I'm not carrying a rucksack. I am not going over the Alps. So I, in my wisdom, got a map out and had a look and thought, okay, I can walk across France, and before I get to Switzerland, I'll turn right and I'll walk down to the south of France to Marseille, and I'll walk around the Mediterranean coast into Italy and down to Rome from there, because that avoids the Alps. And that was as much planning and thought went into it. I am not walking over the Alps. I can't do it. It was about day 6, I met a chap on a footpath in the Scottish borders, it was, Polish chap, Pavlo, who invariably stopped and asked me what I was doing. And when I said, he was asking my route, and I said, yeah, but I'm not going over the Alps. He laughed. He actually burst out laughing. And he said, you do realise that that's the Maritime Alps? And he explained that that whole coastline is just a series of Alp hills. I honestly think I'd still be walking now if I'd gone that route. That then just set me into panic mode. And from that day on, this worry about not going over the Alps forced me to think that I'm going to have to go over the Alps, but I couldn't think how to solve it. So it was just, I think I was still in that mode at 1,000 miles. I still hadn't worked out what I was doing or how I was going to get to Rome, because I wasn't getting some. People were saying, just take a train, just take a bus, never mind the Alps, just leave out the Alps. Nobody's going to worry if you don't go over the Alps. But my stubbornness didn't let me. I wanted to walk every mile, and I had to go over the Alps.
What were the Alps like?
Hilly. The Alps are very high. I really was just making my final plans for how I was going to go over the Alps, only 3 or 4 days before I hit them. By this time, I had joined up with the Camino via Francigena, which is the route that takes you from Canterbury to Rome. And I was only joining it for the purposes of knowing that there was accommodation options at the end of each day. So there was a guidebook, and the guidebook would say there's 3 days to climb the Alps section. Even in the guidebook, it said, unless you're an experienced, sort of confident walker, then perhaps you want to take the train or the bus over the Alps. And a lot of people that I met, and a lot of people do take that option. But that, for me, that just wasn't an option. But I couldn't take the trailer over the Alps, because this was me now going to be walking on the walking, climbing route or footpath route. So on day 1, or the day before day 1 of the climb, I took the trailer on the train up to where I was stopping for the next night. I left it with my host family, and then I got the train back down, and I walked the following day up the Alps. The second day, that host family kindly took the trailer up to the next accommodation, and I walked. And then the third day, I got a taxi company to take Roman to the top. The days, according to the guidebook, are roughly about 6 hours. They tell you how long. I took 10 hours at least on each of the days. And on day 1 of the walk, I've done hill walking in Scotland, lots of hill walking in Scotland, and I've been and walked in hills in Palestine and Jordan and around. So I'm familiar with hill walking generally, and I just in a day pack. But what I realised was that I needed to go at my pace. So within a couple of hours of starting, a young Italian girl caught up with me with her dog, and we chatted, and she was just walking for a few days, and she said, well, we'll walk together. And I walked really slowly. So no, she said, I walked slowly, but it was within probably within 200-300 meters, I realized that her walking slowly and my walking slowly are not compatible. So I was too polite to sort of say I need to drop back. So I continued until the first cafe option, and I deliberately ordered a second cup of tea after we had the first one, and I had to wait for long enough for her to get fed up waiting, and thankfully she then headed off and walked. On the second day, she caught up with me again, and I spent far too long taking photographs and videos of some goats until she got fed up and walked on. But I realised by now, I'm thinking I'm just going to have to be honest with people and say, and that was one of my lessons from the Alps, is I needed to go at my pace, which is a slow pace of walking and lots and lots and lots of stops. I counted at times I was taking about 20 steps before I was having to take another stop to catch my breath, to keep going. And that was my way of climbing the Alps.
But also, this is probably, I can only imagine, one of the most incredible parts of scenery on your journey.
Absolutely stunning.
So why rush that?
Stunning scenery. When I got into Switzerland, and that's the country that people ask me, what was the most beautiful country or what was the most beautiful scenery? It was Switzerland. But the Alps are just, I was very lucky. It was summer and it was nice weather. It was probably still too hot for me. Maybe it was 23, 24 degrees, but thankfully it wasn't a heat wave. And even, I think 3 weeks previously, someone who I met who was obviously walking ahead of me, he had to rearrange his days because there was snow on the Alps. So that's how sort of changeable it is at that height. But it was clear blue skies for 3 days and the scenery was just incredible.
So how did it feel when you finished those 3 hard days?
It was that was almost like that was me. I had made it, because this was my big hurdle. Since the outset, I said I'm not going over the Alps, and then that 1,400 miles of worrying about I might have to go over these Alps. How am I going to do it? Here I was at the top, and I was just elated. It was almost kind of unbelievable, and I did deliberately take a video. With my immediate reaction was, I did it, and that's come back to haunt me because everybody quotes me on that one. But that was I couldn't recreate now how much elation I felt then. It's in that video.
Well done. Facing your biggest fear on that challenge.
Yeah.
Something that you hid away, and actually you not only hid away, it was your rule not to do it. That was like your one kind of non-negotiable.
It's just not happening.
But then you had, from, like you said, day 6 onwards, you faced having to do this, but not
know how,
but also go months with this in the back of your mind.
Massive.
You're trying to enjoy your journey, but you know that halfway or just past halfway, there's going to be your biggest hurdle yet. Something that scared you from the beginning of planning this. What does that say about facing any of life's problems when they just seem when hurdles seem so big when they're far away? Or what happens when you actually approach them on the day and you can work out how you can adapt the situation? Like you say, you managed to get the train on the first day, and then the kindness of people were projecting that forward, and then you used your credit card to get a taxi to get it the third day. There's always an option for you to make that challenge manageable.
Yes, and even at that point on the day before, I was still thinking I could only do 4 or 5. It was about 10 miles a day. I was still thinking that I was going to have to bail out and shorten. So it's a 3-day route, if you like. But I was thinking that I perhaps was going to have to cut those 3 days into 6. It is genuinely, it was a proper fear and hurdle. But I think you're better than, I think the only person that thought I couldn't do this was me. And there was a lot of people probably didn't think about it as whether I could do it or not because it was too big for them to think about it. But my friends would say, we knew you could do it. We knew you would do it. And my stubbornness got me over as much as, yes, I had obviously got fitter over the previous 3-4 months. But I genuinely didn't know that I could get over those Alps. And breaking it down into little bits and just putting one foot in front of the other, we are more capable than we give ourselves credit for.
How do you think that's helped you change your mentality going forward on other things that you could do or didn't think you could do?
I think, yes, I'll still have fears or doubts as to whether I'm able to do something. And a lot of these fears and doubts for me are physical fears and doubts. But I think I came up with solutions. I was forced to come up with solutions, and maybe I will be forced again, but I'll be more inclined to look for the solutions and think that there will be a solution. I can do it. I might not do it in the same way that anybody else does it, but I can and possibly would do it. So I am a stubborn individual anyway, but I think I've probably got more confidence in my ability than I did before the Alps.
It's an incredible part of your journey, knowing that you had to face that for so long in the back of your mind and how you were able to overcome it. An incredible achievement, so well done for that.
Thank you.
What happens after the Alps? Was it a downhill for a while, or were you on a plane? Were you on a plateau for a bit?
After the top of the San Bernard Pass, which is the top of the Alps section of that route, you are coming. Other people are walking back down the hill in the same way that they walked up the hill through the hills and the fields. I'm back with Roman on the hairpin bends down off the other side of the Alps. You cross the Italian border within about 100 metres of the accommodation at the top of the pass. And it was hairpin bend the whole way down. And 3 days later, I realised that was a 10-hour legs, bums and tums class, because it was steep down hills, hairpin bends with 25, 30 kilograms behind me, trying to overtake. So my core was constantly adjusting to keep this trailer behind. But it was so... The other thing mentally about those first 2-3 days over the Alps was confusion. I remember really being just in my head thinking, what's wrong? I don't know what's wrong. I'm really confused. And I didn't know what I was confused about. But I realised that I was on the other side. I didn't have this hurdle anymore. So what? I hadn't allowed myself to think of being on the other side of the Alps. It just wasn't in my head to imagine even. And now I was. And I didn't know what to do because the hurdle was behind me. So yeah, physically it was actually as tough, or the reaction was as tough coming down off the Alps, but mentally it was weird because I was on the other side of the fear.
Nothing else scared you going forward?
I didn't know what was going to scare me. There were more hills ahead, but I had thought about them. But it was like I was just I didn't know, because I'm still every day not knowing where I'm going today. But every day for the last 4 months, I genuinely probably spoke about the Alps to every individual that I spoke to all the way. And now I didn't have that to talk about anymore.
Well, you crossed into Italy, which is kind of your final country, although the Vatican is another country. But it was the final big country for you to kind of pass through. What were the big changes with the Italians?
All roads lead to Rome. When you're in Italy, all roads lead to Rome, and therefore, whether you're a walker with a rucksack or a walker with a trailer, people assume, even if you're not, that the probably assume that you're walking to Rome. So that everybody, I did have people coming to me in villages to talk to me because they could see that I was, they say pellegrina, so a pilgrim. So they would say, pellegrina, and they would chat to me in my non-existent Italian. Google Translate came in a lot with Italy. But so there was a lot of excitement with people when I was in Italy. And the other thing about Italy was because all the roads lead to Rome, you meet lots of other people who are walking to Rome. Now, I never met them on the roads because they were walking on the footpaths, but Italy has a whole system of ostellos, which are hostels for pilgrims, and I would meet up with lots of other pellegrinos in the evenings, and it was a lot more sociable for me with people that had walked in different routes, and we were comparing how we were getting there, how far we were going, and you would meet up with probably I would say about a dozen people that I sort of met up often. Some people you just met for one night and they were walking so fast that you never saw them again. But yeah, Italy was different because for the locals and for other people that I met, me going to Rome was almost, that's what you do. So it was a different mindset from them.
And because of these ostellos and it being quite a popular pilgrimage and there being a bigger influx in people doing the same thing as you, did you require less of the kindnapping because you just had a system in place where you knew you could stay every night? Or did you still get some kindnapping in Italy as well?
I still got, you're right that I didn't require it to the same extent because unlike France, where in July and August, France is shut when it comes to village bakeries and cafes and supermarkets, Italy has a lot more of that infrastructure, and I did have a lot more of that infrastructure available to me. The ostellos, I didn't have my tent. I had offloaded my tent and sleeping bag in Switzerland because I knew that camping really, it's kind of, you can't camp in Italy, but it's not the norm. But also I was aware of this ostello system. So whether it be a church accommodation, it may have been a monastery or a convent, or some villages literally had a one-bedroom flat that was there and available for pellegrinos. So sometimes I had a flat, what seemed to be a flat to myself, with a little kitchen. Others only had a toilet and nothing else. So it's various levels. Other ostellos had volunteers who came and fed the pilgrims. So they would make an evening meal and they would set out breakfast in the morning. So the kindnapping, but I still met lots of kindnappers. I had a little lady run up the street when she saw that I was struggling to walk up the hill of the street, and she came running out the house with a bottle of cold water to give to me. There was a little old man, I'm guessing he was in his 80s, and he was just sorting out his shopping from the car boot. And it was a Google Translate conversation because he obviously recognised me going to Rome, and he was saying, "Oh, Pappy," talking about the Pope. And I came away from chatting to this man with 3 big tomatoes and 2 bottles of Coke. 3 big tomatoes from his garden and 2 bottles of Coke. So yeah, the kindnappers maybe weren't as necessary, but they certainly were still there all the way through Italy.
And then you arrive in Rome. Is it the 4th of November?
4th of November.
At Vatican City. Describe the emotion finishing this journey, which was approximately 2,000 miles.
Well, the funny thing with the emotion of finishing it was I was panicking because I was with friends from the night before. They had come over to Rome to walk the last few miles with me. And they were all really excited and emotional about the fact that I was finishing tomorrow, and I remember really worrying, thinking, why am I not emotional about this? I should feel this is... but as I got to the outskirts of the Vatican grounds, I just burst into tears, and I was still walking, and thankfully Michelle, one of my friends, was taking little snippets of video, so I could now see, and anytime I watched this video that she pieced together, I could see, but it was just that very last few hundred meters, all of a sudden, the emotion, the reality, and I'm feeling it now, even just talking about it, the reality of what I had achieved came to me. And here I was in Rome, and just unbelievable, really.
Was that when you really realised how far you'd actually come? Because your mindset every day was only to take every day as it came, but suddenly you realised that there was no more days left, that actually you'd come to the end.
I got to the end. And I think it probably is that of the fact that I hadn't ever really allowed myself to think of the end, because, that maybe that's self-preservation. But yeah, there was also, I remember a couple of weeks before feeling that somebody said, "Oh, you've only got 2 weeks to go." So no, I don't want only 2 weeks to go, because I want this to continue. So there maybe was an element of that as well, I want to go on. But yeah, really the realisation, and I remember I was breaking my heart, but I remember feeling relieved that I had the emotional reaction to it, because I was worried that was I just such a hard, board that I'm just so determined and stubborn I can walk and that's it, So yeah, it was a
what
nice,
were you feeling? What were you thinking in those last few steps?
That I did it. That I was here, and that I was surrounded by friends that were here to cheer me on. But yeah, it was like an unbelievable that, yeah, I was here, I was at the end, and this square that's sort of synonymous with, you've only seen photos and videos of it, that familiarity of somewhere not familiar at all, but yeah, it was just the and I knew that I had friends waiting in the middle of the square, so it was the sort of anticipation and looking forward to meeting up with them. Yeah, it was.
It's an incredible place to finish. Certainly a worthy place for you to celebrate all your achievements as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What were the next days like?
I could talk for another hour just about the experiences I had in Rome. A couple of weeks beforehand, I had a message from a woman on Facebook saying, "When are you going to Rome? When do you arrive in Rome? I want to come and be there at the finish line when you get there." I didn't know who this woman was. And yeah, I gave her the details. And honestly, I kind of forgot that, about, because I was obviously had, getting to the end and whatever. So I was with my friends, and the president of Mary's Meals of Italy, Mary's Meals Italy, and some of his staff had come along, and some of my friends had come along. So there was a bunch of us, sort of celebrating at the end of in the Vatican Square. And this woman came running over, "Oh, Jed," and gave me a big hug. And it was only at that point that I remembered that there had been this woman who'd said that she was coming to Rome. And my friends laughed and said that they could see in my face that I had no idea. I thought that I knew she was connected to somebody in Geneva, so I assumed that I had met her when I was in Geneva, but I suddenly had a realisation that I don't remember meeting this lady. She turned in, she was an absolute guardian angel that Mum and Dad must have sent, because she has worked all over the world. She has business, language, Italian, German, French, and she had lived in Rome for a couple of years, and so she effectively became our fantastic fluent tour guide.
Oh, brilliant.
She had us in the afternoon that we arrived in Rome. She had us up on the roof terrace of her hotel, which was Pope Paul VI's residence, where Pope Paul VI had stayed. It's now a hotel and sort of dignitaries' hotel, right at the outside of the Vatican statue pillars. And we were up on the roof terrace of this hotel, overlooking the Vatican Square, seeing all the people queuing up to get in, having champagne on the Saturday afternoon. And we called that the Pope's Pub, because to us that was the Pope's Pub. And then Ernestine said, tomorrow morning, she said, "Come back, meet me here again tomorrow morning." We had a tour of Rome with her, and she took us to nice cafes and things. But she said, "Meet me here tomorrow at 11:30. And we'll go back up onto the terrace." And that was for, on a Sunday, 11 o'clock every Sunday, or 12 o'clock every Sunday, the Pope does the Angelus from the window up. So there was queues the whole way into the people queuing up the security to get into Vatican Square, and we are 7 of us up in the Pope's pub, overlooking all this and waving to the Pope over on the same level of us at the other side of so that was just, and what I remember feeling then was, I'm experiencing this, and I can understand why Ernestine was enabling me to experience this, but my friends were able to experience it as well. She also, I had what we call a pilgrim's passport. So once I joined up the Via Francigena, and I was only doing it because I knew you needed to get a stamp in order to stay in some of the ostellos along the way. So you collect stamps all the way through, and I had my passport that you then got stamped in the Vatican to say that you've made it to Rome. This allowed me in the square, and to get into the basilica, I didn't have to wait in the long queues. I could go through the Pilgrim's Gate. Ernestine spoke to the Italian security guard at the Pilgrim's Gate with 7 of us in tow, and managed to persuade him that all 7 of us could get in this one passport. And suddenly we found ourselves in the 3rd row in front of the high altar inside the basilica at Mass in the evening. And I remember saying to somebody at that point, I've never fainted in my life before, but all that needs to happen now is for the Pope to rock up to say this Mass, and I'm sure I would faint. We got kettled out of very gently, very quietly, kettled out of that basilica because it closes at 7 o'clock, and there were 7 of us wandering around in a completely empty basilica. It's normally packed with tourists. We had the place to ourselves until we became aware that there was the Swiss guards, which is maybe a dozen of them, gradually kettled us. Slowly we realised we were leaving. Didn't say anything, they just walked us out of the basilica. So that experience that Ernestine gave me and everybody, it was just incredible for those 2-3 days.
Your whole journey, and I mentioned this at the beginning, is just such a fantastic example of how, if you are willing to put yourself out there, do something that's just not quite normal, something different, that's a little bit out of your comfort zone, and be willing to be open with people and talk to strangers. It's a great example of how, by doing that, by having that mindset, by being in that position, the whole world can fall into place to give you an experience that you would never achieve.
Absolutely not.
Just living a normal life.
I don't think that goes for everybody and anybody. Give people the opportunity to help. People are good, they want to help. But if you don't speak to them, and I didn't always ask for help, but help was given to me without asking, so you don't always have to ask, but open yourself to those opportunities. And I guess I was out there and vulnerable, and I needed those opportunities, and they came to me, but I think they would still come in real life as well, if you look positively rather than assume that things will go wrong.
And your adventures didn't finish there in the Vatican.
Certainly not.
If that wasn't enough of a great experience for you to have, you were also invited to, or you had tickets for general audience for a Mass presented by Pope Francis.
Yes.
But what you didn't know is that you would be presented to him.
Absolutely. So once my friends left on the Monday, my 94-year-old godfather, Uncle Desmond, and his family came over to Rome to be there. He wanted to be there. Uncle Desmond has dementia as well, but he had been following and video calling me throughout the journey. So I was excited, when I was told that they were coming, that he was coming, and that him and I, as I thought, had tickets for the general audience. So it was an amazing experience for him, and for him to be there with me, that was me. I was absolutely delighted. So for the general audience, you have to go to the brass door in the Vatican to collect the tickets. And everybody that's got tickets for the general audience does that. So on the Tuesday afternoon, That's when you could collect the tickets between 3 and 6. Sylvia from Mary's Meals said that she would come along with me, and the others were away. So I went along with Sylvia, and I thought she was being my translator. And that was great that she was being my translator. But it was only then when I went in to collect the ticket. So I had an email with a ticket and gave it to the chap, and he handed me a yellow ticket. And I noticed that everybody else had blue tickets. And it was Sylvia that said, "You're being presented to the Pope." But she knew, because they had applied and they had been told that actually my name was already on the list, because my parish priest, Father Anthony, and the Archbishop of Glasgow had already applied, and they had made these arrangements. But when I had got the message from them, the letter, it looked to me like the same letter that we had got for Uncle Desmond and I to go to the general audience. So I was saying to Agnes, "This is great. We've got a third ticket. You can come with us." So it was only then Sylvia said, "You've been presented," and I panicked as well. Obviously, I was delighted, but at the same time, I thought, I can't do that without Uncle Desmond. He's come all this way. So I said to the guard, through tears, "But Uncle Desmond, he doesn't know who Uncle Desmond is," but to me, I said, "But Uncle Desmond is here. Can he come with me?" And between us, we got there, that, he said, "Well, is he in a wheelchair?" And I said, "Yeah, we hired a wheelchair just to make it easier for him to get around." He said, "Well, that's fine. He can come with you." So that was and Sylvia then had to go back. So she was coming because she knew this, and she had given me a box with the 2 books that Magnus, the founder of Mary's Meals, had written, so that I could present them to the Pope. But I didn't know that till then. So I went back to the bar cafe that we had been having lunch in. The others then joined me an hour later. And it's a wonder that I didn't shake my wine, as I got myself a big glass of wine, and I sat there on my own for an hour until they all arrived, and celebrated the fact that I'm going to be meeting the Pope tomorrow. Which we didn't tell Uncle Desmond, because I didn't want him not to sleep that night. But yeah, this whole experience has just gone into stratospheric level.
So you had a day's notice.
Yeah. Half a day.
Half a day. So you had half a day's notice that you're going to meet Pope Francis.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind that night?
I had no idea. I didn't know what the protocol was. Was I going to be speaking to him? Was I going to have to walk up to him? Feel Uncle Desmond? Or I did that sort of practical side, I guess, probably I was thinking of. But I'm going to meet the Pope. That doesn't happen. This is somebody that I'd seen on TV and had photos and heard stories about. And to me, Pope Francis sort of is up there with what I remember admiring Pope John Paul II, one of the sort of very open and friendly and personable, sort of kind popes. Not all of them are, but John Paul II, I saw him when he was in Glasgow when I was a child. So Pope Francis was there, and so excitement, nerves, because what do you do? It was too unreal, really, to think logically. I thought that the others had known, but they hadn't known either. But thinking that I was getting to go and meet him and have Uncle Desmond with me, which, even just having him in Rome was amazing. But knowing that I could do that, it wouldn't have felt as nice if for whatever reason he wasn't going to be allowed to. I would have felt selfish doing this without him there.
It's really admirable of you that you actually made the stand to make sure that you weren't alone for that experience.
Yeah.
So what happened on the day?
On the morning, I got up. I think I might have had more wine than I would normally have that night before, because I did feel a little bit, and I thought, confession, I think I woke up with a bit of a hangover the day I was meeting the Pope. But I did fill myself with a good breakfast in order to sort of out. By the time I had got up so early that, so we had to be there, and a good hour or so beforehand, and the others they had an apartment in a different part of Rome. So I stood probably for half an hour in the square waiting, and still thinking it was me. I needed to get Uncle Desmond from Agnes. So I waited for a while, and I was watching all the people coming and seeing them with their blue tickets, knowing that I had a yellow ticket in my pocket and I had Uncle Desmond's ticket in my pocket. Thinking, but they're going to see the Pope, but they're not going to meet the Pope. So I was really nervous, and I was nervous because I still didn't know what this experience was going to be. What the protocol was. I think I keep going back to that practicality of, if you'd known that you would get up and you were getting up and you walk over and you nod and smile and say hello and walk on, then I could visualise and imagine doing that. But it was all a bit unknown. But there was a big crowd. The crowds were coming. And then when Agnes arrived with Uncle Desmond in the chair, I got a little bit smart again. And I said to Agnes, well, you hang on to the chair because I've got my ticket. And Uncle Desmond has got his ticket. So if you're wheeling him in, he needs to be accompanied. And the guards accepted that he checked that I had a ticket and that they had a ticket, and Uncle Desmond had to be wheeled in. So therefore, the three of us, his daughter, got to come with us as well. So that maybe was a bit cheeky, but you don't ask, you don't get.
Indeed, yeah.
And it took the two of us to push him up the ramp, up onto in the Vatican Square. There's the grounds that a lot of people will be familiar with, the big sort of almost circular grounds. And then there's the up the stairs to the doors of the Basilica, and that was the altar where the Pope was going to be saying Mass from. So it took us a bit of effort for the pair of us to get the chair up the ramp, sort of zigzag ramp. And when we arrived, then the guards came over and they went out. They said, Geraldine. So they knew, they had a list of who was here. And I kind of wanted to ask them, well, what do we do? And they just sort of told us to sit down, and that was it. So I still didn't know what was happening, how this was going to pan out. But overlooking to my left then, I could just see what is familiar of the crowds of people. And that kind of reminded me of being back in Glasgow when John Paul was in Glasgow. It's just the massive crowds, and we went in the crowds. We were about 10 rows behind. Just there's a kitchen just behind you, and that's probably just about as far as where the Pope was going to be sitting. And at that point, that was when Uncle Desmond, we still hadn't told him that he was going to be meeting the Pope. So he said to me, he realised that the chair and the altar was there, and he said, he knew he was going to Mass, and he said, is the Pope going to be sitting? And I said, yeah. I said, he's going to be sitting there. I said, and after Mass, he's going to come round and say hello to you. And he said, what? And he said, yeah. He said, and he then welled up in tears and got me, and he said, but how? I said, yeah. I said, he's going to come round, he's going to meet you afterwards. And I said, I'm so privileged. He said, I've got to be, he often talks about being 9 to 4. And he says, I've got to live long enough to be 9 to 4, to live long enough to be here. He said, what would Pat and Agnes be saying now? Pat and Agnes being my parents. And that just set me off. And so the two of us in tears, and I just said, but you're here representing Pat and Agnes. And, so that was just a lovely moment for him to realise what was happening, but for him to say, I'm so privileged to be here and I've lived long enough to get to this position, but taking mum and dad back into it as well. That, for me, he was representing mum and dad.
So you watched Mass, and afterwards, that's when the Pope comes to you.
Yes. So, and I keep coming back to this practicality of not knowing, but we were just watching. So there probably was about 10 rows. There was lots of wheelchairs. There were 10 rows of people in front of us. And there was also large groups who'd made, arrangements for groups. So the Pope was then brought round on his wheelchair, and he'd be wheeled along the first row to meet everybody on the first row. And as you meet the Pope there afterwards, the guards are there and they're almost taking the chair away from underneath you and moving on. So the rows were clearing and clearing. Every now and again, he would get to the end of a row and go over and have his photograph taken with a group, and then come back and walk round. So then when he came round, and he had obviously somebody pushing the chair, and he had a photographer, and there'd be a videographer, and probably 2 or 3 Swiss guards. I mean, it seemed to be an entourage that was coming along. And he came along, and I remember thinking he was a lot bigger. And I don't mean fatter, I mean bigger physically, bigger round the head. I have him, imagine him as a tall, slim, thin-faced man, and he's not, whether that's just, but he was a lot bigger. And he came along in the chair with a beaming big smile as he got to me, and I could have put my shaking hand out to him, and he took my hand in a good firm handshake with a big lovely smile. And then I gave him the box of the 2 books, and Magnus had written a letter to the Pope explaining my adventure, but also a bit about Mary's Meals. And I have a little business card that I had got made up with my Home to Rome so that I could hand out to people for donations. I popped the card into the box as well. And literally that was I don't know whether I hadn't thought about what I was going to say, because it was all just a bit surreal. So I just gave him that, and he nodded and smiled, and he went along. And Uncle Desmond then, he blessed the Pope. So he said, "God bless you" to the Pope rather than the way around. And then he went along to Agnes, and as I say, that it was a fleeting moment, but it was an incredible moment to think that this was Pope Francis.
Yeah. And what a fitting way to end your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't end there though. But yeah, that to me, if I had known before the Tuesday afternoon, I think I would have missed so many of the other incredible things that happened along the journey, because I'd constantly be thinking, yeah, but I'm going to meet the Pope. Yeah, but nothing is going to be as good as I'm going to meet the Pope. So I really appreciated the fact that I didn't know, and that was a deliberate ploy not to tell me, which was the right ploy.
So how did it feel returning back to some kind of normality, which you returned back home with this wealth of experience that had taken over 6 months?
The first week was just, I didn't plan anything, I didn't do anything. I deliberately just allowed myself just to do nothing, because I had a girls' weekend that had been long planned even before I had a date in the diary for this, to go to Keswick for the weekend with the girls. So that was nice to have something to look forward to almost immediately. But what it meant was I'd gone from 6 months of summer to Christmas switch-on lights in the course of a week, which was all a bit weird, because I've not even been in any sort of winter yet, and all of a sudden it's Christmas. That seemed odd. And I remember probably early December, so I got back home to Glasgow on the 10th of November. I'd gone away for the weekend following that. And early in December, I remember sitting in the house thinking, who am I going to meet tonight? Where am I going tomorrow? And it was that, so maybe it took 3 or 4 weeks, the realisation that I was missing the routine, missing I'm not going, what, that was kind of sad. I've not got that purpose of what I'm doing, where am I going, what, who am I going to meet up with, and that side of it, particularly because that had been the last 2 weeks in Italy, last 2 months in Italy, was meeting up, invariably meeting up with people in the evenings, planning to see them. So I missed it then. But then it came Christmas and getting back into work mode, and so real life gets back. I'm very much aware of that period of missing it. And I think now, because I've started to do talks about it, I'm reliving a lot of the memories. So I'm enjoying that process. So I don't know if I have, or I'm not aware of it, or if I've still got the post-adventure blues to come that people often talk about. It was a long time. And I think back logically now, 6 months is a long time. it was almost like it didn't really, that was just, one of my friends described me as, you just do what you do. That's your personality. This is what you're doing today. It's not about what you did yesterday or tomorrow, it's just today. So whether that's saving me from crashing, but talking about it and seeing still people's reactions of saying, I can't believe that you did it, or such a long journey, or, when I've been doing the talks, then they're asking about it. I'm reliving a lot of it, and I'm enjoying that rather than not enjoying it.
Well, one of the things I love about what you're doing now is that you are reconnecting with the communities that you pass through.
Yeah.
You're coming back and you're telling them the full story now with hindsight and with the finish with the finish that you achieved as well, because you were only passing through with a journey with an aim to do something, but now you've got the whole package, and you're coming back. You're not only reconnecting with the communities, but you're delivering talks. Mm-hmm. You're being open and honest again and chatting to strangers, and then inspiring them and through your stories. And
and that's the lessons that I've sort of summarised, and in hindsight, is that thing about going at your own pace, and that's not just physically, but whatever it is that you're thinking of, your pace is the right pace for you. So don't. I'm not a competitive person. I know that's a personality trait that other people have, but your pace is the right pace, so don't worry about not going at that pace. The kindnapping and the kindness and the lesson of, is this an opportunity for us to think when we could be kind to other people? We all sort of like to think that we're kind, and I'm sure most of us are kind, but maybe it's an opportunity to look out for opportunities to be kind. And then the sort of charity side of it, and that's the reason that I'll continue with the talks, is to keep the fundraising going, to sort of keep supporting two incredibly important but valid and worthwhile charities that everybody has got a tap into, one or other, both of them. Awareness or not, they're definitely, you can come up with hundreds of charities, but they report it to me. But I've found that other people have said that they're valid and important for them as well.
Well, it's been incredible hearing your story, and incredibly inspiring to see someone take on such a big challenge, challenging themselves every day, but also overcoming some of the big hurdles along the way. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much, Geraldine. Appreciate it.
Very kind. Thank you very much for having me and listening to me waffle.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes, where you will also find links to things mentioned in the conversations. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find, and I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.